In 1950, a Formula One mechanic set off for the entire racing season with £25 in cash, £100 in traveller's checks, and 20 gallons of petrol. That was the budget. That money was not set aside for one single race. That money was meant to fund the entire season. When you look at the sport today, those numbers sound like an absolute joke. 76 years later, the cars those exact same teams build run on incredibly complex hybrid power units. They feature active aerodynamics and onboard computing power that the original founders of the sport could not have possibly dreamed of. All of this technology exists inside an industry that is now so unbelievably valuable that a single junior team recently turned down a reported $3 billion buyout offer without a second thought. Somewhere between a tired mechanic counting petrol coupons and a modern car that automatically adjusts itself mid-corner, Formula One changed almost everything about itself. The sport fundamentally transformed the money, the machines, and the people driving them. The scale of this financial evolution is unlike anything else in modern sports history. This is that whole story. Formula One's first World Championship season officially ran in 1950. The calendar looked completely different back then, featuring just 6 European races, plus the Indianapolis 500, which was actually run to different rules entirely. The business side of the sport was essentially non-existent. There was not even a Constructors' Championship yet. That specific commercial and sporting competition did not officially exist until 1958. For its first 8 years, the entire concept of a professional racing team as a functioning business did not officially exist anywhere in the sport's own rulebook. Alfa Romeo ended up winning that very first title with Giuseppe Farina, finishing narrowly ahead of his own teammate, Juan Manuel Fangio. Ferrari entered that opening season too, and they have entered every single season since. That is 76 years completely unbroken. No other team on the grid can say that. If you did not know Ferrari has been on every single grid since race 1 in 1950, that is exactly the kind of business history this channel exists to dig up. Subscribe to Velocity Vanguard and be the Ferrari to our F1. Now, let us look at what a team actually was back in those early days. Back then, a team simply meant a handful of mechanics and a rented garage. The cars were built entirely by hand, and they were often heavily modified from whatever old chassis a manufacturer happened to have lying around after the war. The operation was incredibly raw. There was zero telemetry to track the car's performance. There was no pit-to-car radio to talk to the driver. There was absolutely no aerodynamics department, mostly because aerodynamics as an engineering discipline barely even existed. These teams raced naturally aspirated and supercharged engines, running under a strict 1947 rule set. The cars were front-engined, they had no wings, and they produced absolutely no downforce to speak of. Drivers in this era were a completely different breed. They were often gentlemen racers or regular works team employees, and they were paid very modestly relative to whatever a manufacturer's engineering department could easily spare. There was no separate, highly lucrative driver market. You drove because a factory happened to hire you for the weekend, or because you actually owned the car yourself. The budget wasn't small because racing was inherently cheap. It was small because there was simply no Formula One industry yet to spend real money on. Which obviously raises a massive question. If there was no underlying industry, no corporate valuation, and absolutely no ownership market, where did all the money eventually come from? The massive flood of money came directly from car manufacturers deciding Formula One was finally worth serious marketing money. And for about half a century, almost nobody cared about that. The spending simply spiraled out of control. By the time the 2000s rolled around, there was absolutely no spending limit at all. Reports from that specific era put the biggest manufacturer-backed teams, with Ferrari and Mercedes among them, spending well over $400 million a single year. At the exact same time, the smaller independent teams raced on budgets of less than $150 million. They were competing in the exact same championship. This created a massive, unbridgeable budget gap that absolutely no amount of raw driver talent could ever close. The technical side moved right in step with the massive spending. V10 engines gave way to the early V8s. Refueling mid-race added extreme danger, and a brutal tyre war between Bridgestone and Michelin pushed on-track performance incredibly hard. The development moved at a blinding speed because there was absolutely no spending cap to slow anyone down. However, this era of unlimited cash also quietly turned Formula One into a massive financial liability for the people who actually owned it. When a corporate manufacturer's board asks what $400 million a year actually bought them, and the honest answer is 7th place, the racing team simply does not survive the next economic recession. Unlimited spending did not make Formula One more valuable. It made it incredibly fragile. The cost cap finally arrived in 2021, sitting at a reported $145 million. It was built specifically to stop the complete financial collapse the 2000s had just proven was inevitably coming. By 2025, that cap sat at a base of $135 million, adjusting upward to account for global inflation. For 2026, the exact same year Formula One's entire technical rulebook is getting completely rewritten around brand new hybrid power units and active aerodynamics, the cap rises again to $215 million. That jump is not about the teams magically getting $80 million richer. The FIA has been very clear that the increase is mostly just an accounting shift. High operational costs that used to sit comfortably outside the cap are now strictly counted inside it. Here is the part of the financial puzzle that actually matters the most. The cost cap only covers direct car performance. It absolutely does not touch driver salaries, marketing budgets, or the massive paychecks of a team's top few executives. So the massive amounts of money that used to go directly into running wind tunnels 24/7 did not just magically disappear. That corporate money went looking for somewhere else in the organization to live, and it quickly found it in the one specific place the cap absolutely cannot reach: the global driver market. The baseline pay for the grid's top names has climbed very sharply since 2021. This surge happened precisely because driver salary is now the least regulated, fastest-growing line item any team has on its books. Because of these tight financial regulations, Formula One now spends far less on raw car development relative to a team's total revenue than at almost any point in its entire modern history. Because the bleeding finally stopped, team valuations have absolutely never been higher. You already know the massive headline from our cold open. Red Bull turned down a reported $3 billion for Racing Bulls without hesitating. Check out the video on our channel to learn more. What really matters for this specific story is that the Red Bull rejection is not an isolated case. The entire grid is currently cashing in on this financial explosion. McLaren successfully sold a partial stake in late 2025 that comfortably valued the entire team at $4.1 billion. Aston Martin quickly stepped up and sold down a highly lucrative slice of its own ownership. Audi confidently brought in Qatar's massive sovereign wealth fund before the new team had even turned a single wheel in competition. Alpine's minority owner is currently fighting hard to sell its own stake for reportedly triple what it originally paid back in 2023. Notice exactly what is not happening across any of these massive corporate boardroom deals. Absolutely nobody thinks Formula One is in financial trouble. Every single party involved in these negotiations thinks the underlying asset is worth vastly more than the other side is currently offering. This represents the exact opposite disease from the one that nearly killed the major manufacturer teams back in 2008. Formula One teams are now behaving exactly like appreciating financial assets. They are no longer viewed as simple racing operations that only occasionally turn a minor profit. The core value is not leaving the sport when a minor stake simply changes hands. These massive multi-billion-dollar transactions are simply proving that the new value is entirely real. So here is the full 76-year arc, pulling all four major threads together. Financially, Formula One went from having no real industry at all to an industry that nearly destroyed itself with reckless, unlimited spending. It then pivoted to a strictly capped industry that became so effective at creating massive value that owners now easily turn down billion-dollar checks. Technically, the sport evolved from hand-built front-engined cars with absolutely zero aerodynamics to a highly advanced hybrid computer-governed machine. These modern cars are vastly more complex than anything the sport's original founders could have possibly imagined. And for the drivers, the overall pay moved from simply accepting whatever a factory could spare to becoming the single fastest-growing, least regulated major expense on the entire grid. This massive shift happened precisely because everything else on the car got aggressively capped first. The actual racing did not get significantly more expensive. Almost everything else around the racing did. £25, $400 million, and $3 billion. Those are three distinct numbers defining three totally different eras. They each answer one core question completely differently. What is a Formula One team actually for? Right now, the real answer isn't simply to win races. The answer is to be the appreciating asset everyone else wishes they owned.